Well, welcome back, Miguel. It's great to have you here this afternoon. It is May 19th, 2022, and this is the third part of your oral history for the Oral History Project Revisited. When we left a couple of week or so ago, we were talking about folks that you learned from in order to do your work at CRS, and you talked at length about Captain Bob Lamb.
Yes.
And then you mentioned a few other names, and I have some follow-up questions for you. You talked a little bit about Wallace Warfield, and that's perfect. The other two were John Timones,
yes,
and Jim Pettis.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering if you have any stories or memories from your work with them that you might share with us.
Well, very quickly, I think I mentioned briefly that Wally and I opened up the office in St. Croix.
That's right. At the insistence of Spiro Agnew, correct?
Yes, exactly.
Right.
At the insistence of Spiro Agnew. Of course, we didn't know, what was to be in the future with him. But anyway, we never actually got to talk to him. But anyway, a very funny thing happened on the way to the Virgin Islands. We were told, Wally and I, that this was supposed to be quote unquote top secret. I don't know exactly why it was supposed to be top secret, but as it turned out, what we were told was that if it was known that CRS particularly was going to go to the Virgin Islands to quote unquote investigate, and well, first of all, as you know, we don't investigate, but what we were told was that this would hurt tourism if the issue of the racial turmoil that was brewing would become known, and that we were there, this would hurt tourism. So we said, okay. And anyway, we're into the flight, Wally and I, when we get a call from the flight attendants to come forward to the first class section. Okay, we'll go there. And in the first class section was the governor of the Virgin Islands. I believe his last name was Evans. I don't recall his first name now, but Governor Evans told us that he was happy that we were coming down to help him and so forth. And he insisted that we sit with him in first class. So we got upgraded. Anyway, when we arrive at the Virgin, at St. Thomas, he was met at that time there weren't gates. You get off the plane and you walked on the field by his limousine, which he insisted he would take us to the hotel. Now, his limousine had, of course, a police escort. It had the Virgin Islands flag on one side and the US flag on the other on the fender, so it was a procession. So when Wally and I got off at the hotel where they left, we were there no longer than 5 minutes in our rooms when the phone rang from the local media wanting to know why the Justice Department was in the Virgin Islands. So the whole top secret thing just got blown out of the water. Anyway, as I mentioned to you before with Wally, the thing that I most admired him was that he could keep his cool at all times. He was very professional. So I tried to, as much as I could, to emulate that, to be try to be detached when I was working with the clients, with the people that I had to do so. So I have two personas. and this was a very good lesson to be with Wally. As I mentioned, Bob Lamb had this kind of command presence. He was a large man. He had been in World War II in the military. I believe he was an officer. I'm not sure about that, but anyway.
You discussed that he was working south of the Mason-Dixon line.
That's right. I was told that Atlantic City was below the Mason-Dixon line, and I had been down in that area in Vineland, New Jersey, nearby before, because there had been a death of a Puerto Rican migrant worker. It's basically tomato country down there, you know, and it was rumored that some anti-immigrant people had waylaid him and killed this guy, and so we were down there. So that's how bad it was in Vineland, New Jersey, and in southern New Jersey. It was kind of a dangerous assignment. I was told too that I had better watch myself. So I kept my eyes on the road and on the back of the car as well, you know. And when I got to the room, I got very paranoid and pushed a sofa up against the door at night. But nothing happened. Nothing happened. Anyway, I learned a lot from Bob, and as I'm sure other people will tell you that he had contact with him, will tell you the same thing. He was very dedicated to the mission of CRS, and I'm not sure that he used the term sacred mission, but you got the impression from him that that's how he believed that he was doing something special. And I got to believe that too, and I think others too. We were not, I would say, ordinary, and I don't mean this in a disparaging way, we were not ordinary government workers. We worked whatever hours were necessary to do something. Sometimes there was not much to do. So you could be free with your time, you took extra time for lunch or, you know, whatever. But if there was a crisis, you worked it almost 24 hours. You went late night meetings. We would go to late night meetings wherever it was. Sometimes we had to stay over at the location. But sometimes, you know, you went there during the day and then you were meeting there during the day and then you stayed at night for community meetings. So you just worked what you needed to work. And I think a lot of people did that. And the agency then was relatively small still. And you knew everybody, you know, and you knew, you know, about their families and, you know, what they did for their hobbies and everything else. There was a very, I wouldn't say we didn't have disagreements among each other, ourselves, but we respected ourselves, our colleagues. And there was, you know, Bob, I worked with him a couple of times in a team meeting. One was in Miami, Florida. And he had that concept of team building, you know, getting together and after work and talking about the cases and so forth. So he was a very, to me, a very inspiring individual. So that's what you know, and Taronis, he was a very funny guy. I went with him. We were in Miami once, and after work, we wanted to see this nightclub called the Le Violin. in Miami, which was a Cuban-run nightclub. And so we went there, and we couldn't get in. It was so crowded or something. And out of the clear blue sky, John Toronis tells the bouncer or the person is at the front door, he says, "Why, I'm Congressman Toronis from Chicago." I mean, he was kidding. He was kidding. But the guy took it seriously. So I said, "Oh, Congressman, I'm so sorry." And he took us into the into this club and gave us front row seats. And they had a show on the Cuban version of Madame Butterfly. You know, the opera. I'll never forget that. Anyway, it was a big laugh. But if you were with John Toronis, he had a wonderful sense of humor, a friendly way about him. And his real expertise was dealing with the American Indian movement. And he was very well respected by them, and he basically was the one that got involved in the whole Wounded Knee thing and so forth. So you learn, if you're gonna do anything with American Indians, I made sure that when I had cases in upstate New York, I would call John, you know, because he knew all of the characters all over the country. Not only Russell Means and the people from AIM, you know, but all over the country. So he was good that way. He could give you good information and you know, tell you. And one thing I learned from John, because of his sense of humor, he says, "Miguel, one of the things you really know but the American Indians, there's a generality, okay? He said, but they're very funny guys too." So don't take it all that seriously, you know, joke around, it's fine. They like to kid around. So anyway, I learned that from John.
Oh, that's great. And Jim Pettis as well.
Pettis, yes.
What made him someone to learn from as well?
Well, Jim was out of Texas, and I got called to go to San Angelo, Texas, with a Mexican desegregation case, everything else, and so it was my first real exposure to the Mexican American community, you know. So again, Jim was also, you know, very knowledgeable because he lived that, and so I learned a lot from him whenever I was called to, because you know, you think because you're one brand of Hispanic, or people think that, then you know every other group, you know, automatically. And let me put it this way, the Hispanic community is very diverse. They are, in essence, different tribes, if I can use that word. And each group, whether it's Mexicans, Guatemalans, or Cubans, as an example, they have different histories. The Spanish language is the same, but they use, you know, there's different words, there's different slang terms, and different experiences. So I learned very quickly, because my background is Puerto Rican, and I have a certain affinity to that. But I learned from working with the Mexican American community that they're not Puerto Ricans. They're different, okay? And if you're going to work with them, you need to understand that culture. You need to understand that culture a little bit better than you normally would, and not make assumptions based on your own ethnicity.
And Jim helped you navigate that.
Yes,
particular
absolutely, because he was a very universal kind of guy.
So what if someone were entering CRS as a new conciliator? what would you advise someone entering this line of work to do or observe to become effective?
Well, you know what? I'm kind of reluctant to advise anybody because the world has changed. You know, I was there at a particular time, but now things have changed. So I would say I would be very reluctant to say do this or do that or you know, and so forth to anybody. I would if they wanted my advice, if they said, "Oh, this is the problem," or "I'd like to know how to approach this," or well, I might offer advice. But I would be very, even so, I would be reluctant to do that. I would try to find out from them, you know, what the situation is and so forth. But I would always put it on the terms of, you know, I was there at a different time than you are. Now, I really don't know the people who are there now. I would assume, particularly people coming on now, who they're being recruited, many of them, I think, I've heard many of them, or quite a few of them, have been trained as mediators and have degrees in mediation, I've heard. I'm not absolutely certain about that, but I've heard that. So, so they're coming from a different perspective. I don't know what their commitment is to CRS as itself. You know, I knew the people that I worked with, the vast majority had that feeling that they were in a special group. You know, we often talked about, not often, but from time to time, about this whole concept of, you know, so the legend is that when President Johnson signed the legislation, he said something along the line of, "Come, let us reason together." And that was kind of inspirational too, you know, that we were there to get people to sit down and talk and reason, try to reason together. So I don't know what their training and background is, the new people, but we have a new director who's not really new. He was there before, and we've tried to work with him in the past when he was there, and he was very receptive to our group. You know, we have a group called CRS Remembered, which is made up of mostly people who worked at CRS or retired or worked there for some time. So I'm hopeful that he might be open to the idea of having an advisory group of former employees, not to tell them what to do on specific cases, but to talk once or twice a year about general direction of the agency, policy, and practice, you know, that kind of thing. Obviously, we don't want to interfere with, you know, with the day-to-day operations or to be supervisory people or anything like that, you know, but at least to think about having an advisory group. It could be as wide as possible. You know, when we went to agencies in the past, we asked mayors to create human rights organizations, you know, to create police review boards, and a lot of federal agencies do have advisory committees, and there's a specific federal law that allows that, you know. So I'm hoping at least that maybe somewhere down the line, we would have an advisory group of former employees and other experts to sit down with the director and the management, you know, once or twice a year, hopefully twice a year at least, and talk about the direction of the agency. And if they want us to participate in doing some training kinds of things, I'm sure several of us could do that. I don't know if it's
good.
going to happen, but that's the direction we're going. I'm trying to get to.
Great. One last question before we get back to the street mediation questions.
Yeah.
Do you have any written accounts of what you did in a particular case or any other publications about your work? I know that most, obviously you weren't technically going to write about what you did.
Yeah. No, I don't have anything, that was published or anything like that. No.
Yeah. But I appreciate you, for the reader and the viewer of this oral history, I appreciate you mentioning unsolicited Bob Lamb's reference to the sacred mission and President Johnson's reference or quote, "Come, let us reason together." I think you may know that Timothy Johnson put together a short note using his personal paper, personal printer, personal time, personal ink, personal stamps, and sent to his colleagues in CRS at one point in time, and you may or may not have been there, a note about what the sacred trust means to him personally, and what the spirit of CRS is, to come, let us reason together. And so it's really interesting to hear you say that without knowing of Timothy Johnson.
No, I never read it. No.
And as part of this project, it'll be incorporated, not the original, but the text of it. So I just wanted to share that with you. So great, Miguel. So I wanted to turn now, what we did in the first oral history is you gave me a few examples of cases, the Williamsburg case, you talked about going down to Cuba, Central America, you talked about other cases, really, really great illustrations. And then I asked you generally to walk me through what you did at a table-oriented mediation process, a community mediation, some of the challenges. You talked about the challenges of, quote, what you call community mediations. And particularly one day you might have one leader of an organization at the table, and the next day the leadership changes, and now you got to deal with new people or challenges of setting ground rules. But I wanted to talk to you now about your work navigating, conciliating in street or community oriented processes. That's the framing that we have. What we mean by that is during a demonstration. Were you involved in conciliating during demonstrations? And can you talk a little bit about your role in that context?
Yeah. I was present at a lot of demonstrations. So a few of them involved Reverend Al Sharpton, since we were in New York City, and the one I remember most with him was the Hasidim black dispute in Crown Heights, which was really quite a large demonstration, and a lot of violence resulted from that. It happened that a black child was accidentally killed in an automobile accident with a young rabbinic student driving a car, as I recall. But anyway, so a lot of demonstrations ensued, and Reverend Sharpton and several others in the Black community, leadership people, came down to East New York, Crown Heights neighborhood, which was largely at that time, was largely an African-American neighborhood, and shared
Sorry, Miguel. For some reason, you just went on mute there. So if you
Yeah.
could just say Crown Heights was largely an African-American neighborhood and that's where you were.
Lubavitcher, which is another sect of the Hasidim community.
Say it one more time.
Lubavitcher.
Okay, thank you.
Lubavitcher. And Rabbi Schneerson was the principal, rabbi there and revered by his community. I guess I could, this is a bad analogy, but I can't think of a better way to say it. He was like the cardinal, okay, of the Lubavitcher, that had that kind of leadership in the community. So anyway, it was a very tense time. There was violence. And in one instance, there was a huge street fight between the young Lubavitcher rabbinic students and the Black community. I mean, bricks were flying, 2x4s were flying. So when violence breaks out like that, there's very little that you can do. Okay. But one of the things that I learned from that, I learned it actually from Tim Johnson about what you can do when violence breaks out and you're at a demonstration. And I saw Tim do this. I forget exactly what the situation was, but what he did was he called a kid over that was riding, just says, "Hey, come here, I want to talk to you," And he went up and talked to the kid and established a one-on-one with him. And he kind of pulled him out of the situation. Okay. And then talked to another kid that way. And then more kids came over to see what the conversation was all about and got the kids engaged in a sort of a dialogue. He didn't tell them, don't do this or don't do that, just talking, So that was a very, I don't think he remembers that. I
just want to make sure I'm understanding this.
Yeah.
So there is some violence with bricks and clubs and other things between these two communities. And Tim is calling people over one at a time.
Yeah.
And then having a conversation about like their needs and interests or what? Do you know what the conversations were about?
Like, tell me what's happening. Why are you here? Just a very general conversation without making any demands on anybody to, maybe you should get off the street or something like that, which they're not going to do. But so I kind of applied that, because I saw it was effective. It worked. In a real situation, it wasn't something that somebody said in a training, class.
Yeah.
It was a real thing. So, so that was.
And so others came over just to see what was happening.
Kids came over. Yeah, other kids came over.
And so that took some kids out of the violent parts of the demonstration.
Yeah. So that was one thing.
Did you have other strategies at demonstrations?
Yes. Other strategies that I used was I always made sure that if there was a demonstration, I would find out who the top police officer was, commander. And I made sure that I went over to him or her, to the post where they were, and I introduced myself. And I, talked to him. I said, "Look, I'm going to be in the area. I've been told to be here, part of my job." And then if there was a while they were briefing the other police officers, I would try to go over there and introduce myself so that they would know I was in the area. Okay. I did that for my own safety, basically, because I didn't want to get hurt, potentially hurt, but I thought it was good. It was good politically, if I can put, a small p, to get to know the cops as well as the leadership of the community of the demonstrators, because that showed I was even-handed, and I was.
Yeah, so how did you quickly build some trust with those police folks on the ground and with demonstrators?
Well, you knew there was going to be a demonstration, and you talked to the group that was organizing it or leading it, and we tried to talk about self-appointed marshals, that kind of thing. If you wanted us to kind of get what's the route of march, and try to get an agreement between the police and the community about the route of march, where it was going to go, how it was going to go, who was going to be there, that kind of stuff. So that was in a way, mediation, if you will, but information sharing. So there would be no surprises as much as possible. So anything can happen, but you wanted the people, you wanted the police and the community leaders to know each other. If something came up, who they could go to complain, to, or to, voice whatever concerns they had, and come into certain agreements about route of march and self-policing, that kind of thing.
So did you train demonstrators in self-marshaling or self-policing? And what did that look like?
Well, training would be a strong word. What we did was suggest that they have self-policing, and, maybe you should have people with armbands, but we didn't train each individual group, and how to actually do it. But I mean, it's a very simple process, and a lot of the times at demonstrations, there would be law students, and lawyers present who were there as observers. One, to help people who were arrested, when they had mass arrests or whatever it was. And to, they would represent them, not us, they would represent them. So there was some coordination with those groups as well. That was also very important. In other words, you try to figure out who is who, what do they do, why are they here, and so forth. And if it's possible, get them together, or informally, so that things would go as well as they possibly could.
With those observers, it sounds like
Yeah.
you wanted to know why they were there, what they were doing, and so everyone was transparent.
Yeah.
As to what their role was.
Yeah, but we were not observers, in the sense that we weren't subsequently going to testify about what happened and all that stuff. No.
Yeah, I think there's a statute about that.
Yeah.
That would prohibit that. Or I hope it would.
Yeah.
So you found yourself, you actually used the word mediating. You found yourself mediating issues like the demonstration route. Were there other issues that you found yourself mediating between the demonstrators and the police or community officials?
Yeah, this, obviously well, one thing we would say to the police commander, look, they have marshals, self-marshals, and they're going to be wearing armbands so that you know who they are, and they'll be at the marching outside of the marshals themselves, you know. So this is who they are. If there's a problem, you know, see this guy or that guy. I mean, depending on, you know, in New York City, you never had a problem with that because you have a very sophisticated police department. You can complain about them for sure, but you know, they knew what the hell they were doing, and they had a whole police community relations units. I mean, large. Okay, they would send 20, 30, 40, 50 guys with blue jackets, light blue jackets, and there's community affairs on the back, you know. But I mentioned before, most police departments are 10 people, you know, yeah, on average. But so depending on the size of the police department, the situation you were in, you know, you had to figure that out.
So when you were doing this, and I imagine there were lots of demonstrations in New York City that you heard at, and they sent out their community relations unit, and
Yeah.
you knew who you were working with. But if you were in upstate New York or another rural or suburban community that didn't have this kind of resources,
Right.
how did that make a
But
difference? What did you do differently?
then you were more intense in terms of talking to you could talk, you know, I couldn't in New York City. I don't think I ever talked to the police commissioner, except one time. But anyway, yeah, so you could rarely talk to, you know, a higher level, but in a small community, you know, you could walk into the chief's office practically without an appointment, you know. So.
Did you, I know you see your role as neutral or impartial generally. Did you feel that shifting or drifting away when you were working at a demonstration, or did you feel that you remained neutral?
No, we always remain neutral, always, you know. That was sort of a drill thing. There were instances where you couldn't talk to both sides. You know, where was I? There was a huge demonstration. I think it was Gary, Indiana, where the Ku Klux Klan was marching. Okay, and the mayor, they were protesting. I don't know what they were protesting, but anyway, the Ku Klux Klan was there, and we had to. And the mayor said, "Nobody, they are not going to march in my city." Okay, these people are trouble. We don't want them. They're violent and so forth and so on. So let's just speak to the mayor. I think it was Gary. Yeah. No, not Gary. Josh. My memory is failing me. But anyway, it was like that kind of a city. And Carroll, Illinois.
Okay.
And so, you know, we said to them, I forget who I was there with, maybe it was Toronis. But yeah, I said, we understand that, you know, we understand your feelings and so forth, because they were protesting against the Jewish community. And we said, yeah, we understand that. But, you know, you might have some runs into some problems with you know, if they go to court and claim First Amendment rights and so forth. And, you know, I was telling them, I'm not a lawyer, but, you know, certainly knew about the First Amendment and what that meant. So what you might run into trouble. So anyway, ultimately he did come around to that, and he said, okay, we can let them march as much as I hate them. And, you know, he went the whole thing. But then we worked with the local police, so forth. But we could never talk to the leadership of the Ku Klux Klan. They rebuffed every effort we ever made to talk to them. Then they would say after, they didn't talk to us. They weren't neutral. They only talked to the Jews, or they only talked to the blacks. They don't talk to us. You know, that was part of the thing that happened. So anyway.
Sounds like it was part of their strategy.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
Did you ever try to end or redirect violence at a demonstration?
Well, the only one I could recall was in Boston, Massachusetts, where violence had broken out in the Puerto Rican community, Hispanic community. There had been a Puerto Rican festival, and I don't know what happened. I recall, what triggered it off. But anyway, so these kids were looting stores, and they were looting. In this particular incident, we observed was a sneaker store. So they all went into the sneaker store and they started taking shoes. So went into the sneaker store and talked to these kids and said, look, I don't think this is really helping, okay? Because what's going to happen is the guy is going to lose the store. You won't be able to get any sneakers anymore. Nobody will even buy from him. And besides that, the guy that owns it is Hispanic. So I said, who are you hurting? How does this translate to that kind of stuff? Anyway, we started talking to the kids, on the one by one basis, sort of, or group here and there, and they all walked out, So they stopped looting. I was there with a guy named Ed Cabell. I don't know whatever happens to Ed, but anyway. So, but as we're doing this and things happen and we dispelled those kids from taking stuff at the store, the Boston tactical force comes running down the street, in close order drill, and they got the batons like this, And so we went over to talk to them and said, oh, it's okay now, everything, it's gone, everything else. Well, they said, well, who the hell are you, But words to that effect, a little stronger. and Ed Cabell pulled out his credentials and said, well, I'm Edward Cabell, United States Department of Justice, and blah, blah, blah. So the police commander said, well, get your effing federal ass off the streets. So I said to Ed, come on, let's go, But anyway, they the police officer pushed Ed, knocked him down onto, and actually he got hurt, And anyway, we I don't know, we left, but Ed had to go to the hospital. And about a month later, I was in Miami on another case, and a federal agent came up to me, FBI, and we had to tell him what happened, everything, because went up. The complaint went up. We called the director of CRS, and he calls Attorney General. I don't know. Anyway, it's a big thing.
Yeah. So okay.
Yeah, became a big deal. But yeah, so yeah, we took care of the riot at that sneaker store. We intervened directly.
Yeah, right.
But it didn't turn out so well for
for you guys. Oh my. Anything come of it from the FBI investigation?
No, we never heard anything more. Yeah. No, never heard anything more.
So did you ever train protesters or advocates to be more effective?
Did I ever train for what?
Did you ever train, or your colleagues ever train protesters or advocates to be more effective at articulating their needs and interests?
Yes, I didn't. Okay, but yeah, that was a part of the training thing, how to train marshals and that kind of stuff. Yeah, but I didn't do it. Not because I didn't want to, but I just had a different style. Okay, and so no.
So You've described some other parties like observers,
Yes,
legal observers, attorneys who are helping civil
yeah,
rights advocates after they're
yeah.
arrested.
Mhm.
Were there other parties involved in your efforts, and how did you work with them?
Well, clergy,
Mhm.
okay. I mean, of all persuasions. Um, so we made sure we touched base with the clergy, work with clergy groups. We call them the God Squad, you know. Wherever they were, oh, you got to talk to the God Squad. So, yeah. I think I mentioned before that chambers of commerce were very important to touch base with because they really had a stake in getting the situation calmed down, you know, and because, you know, there was a general feeling between other people that, look, some people said, well, some people said you're betraying the community that's protesting violently, you know, because this is the only way you're going to get change, by calming down, you know, people and telling them not to. And I don't know how others felt, but I felt I don't want to see anybody die, okay, or get hurt or get arrested. You know, I think that's more important because there's another way to try to resolve this or to try to resolve this. I wasn't exactly Martin Luther King, you know, you know, but I did believe in nonviolence, you know, as a way of ultimately achieving civil rights, and I still do. But you know, that was me, and I think a lot of people. But there was that general complaint against CRS. These guys are trying to stop the riot. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a refrain that I have heard before. Certainly. So you would articulate your goals, or you had your goals in mind for when you were doing this type of street conciliation or mediation.
Mhm.
Did you explain those goals to the folks you work with, whether it were the police or the advocates or others? And did they usually share those goals, or did they have others?
Well, there were different responses. Okay.
Mhm.
If you had a rapport with people, and or you knew them from a previous situation, or you know, or you got entree to them from somebody who knew you, then you could have an effect. If you came in cold, you know, you parachuted, you know, you came into a situation, you didn't know anybody, everything, and because, as I mentioned, a lot of people are suspicious of CRS, you know. You're part of the Justice Department, you're part of the police, you're FBI or whatever. So in those cases, you couldn't make much headway until you developed an area of trust. But if you develop trust, and people would acknowledge it later on, they wouldn't acknowledge it right then that, you know, they were gonna, that you helped. And this is also very critical. I always felt, or was taught to believe, that the resolution was not your resolution, that you did something, but that the people who were involved closely and had to take it, they were the ones who got the credit for it, you know, whatever. Okay. And sometimes you have to be the fall guy. Okay. It was just, you know, the way it was.
So how did they acknowledge your work in these environments?
Well, sometimes the most obvious way that we would get a letter, you know, so and sent to the attorney general, or the president, or somebody, and you know, and it works down to you.
2 years later, probably.
Yeah. When Yusuf Hawkins was killed, he was a young black man who went with some of his friends to Bensonhurst section of Brooklyn. You saw that movie with John Travolta, where he's in this Italian neighborhood in Brooklyn, Italian American neighborhood, Bensonhurst. But anyway, he went there to buy a car and ran into some young Italian kids, Italian American kids largely. And they said to him something to the effect of, what the hell are you doing in this neighborhood? And somehow or another, they beat him up and he died. And it was a big mess, with demonstrations, people in the town. So anyway, my job in that thing was to reach out to the Italian American community. So I started with the local church there, and I worked with the Italian American Committee and, all these different Italian civic organizations, because tempers were really very high. And, Reverend Sharpton was there, and there were, demonstrations every weekend, So anyway, I worked with them. And I don't know, a year later, I don't know, whatever it was, I got this glowing letter thanking me for talking to them and being with them. And, I didn't do anything, special. I never got to the point where I had a meeting with Reverend Sharpton and the people and the Italian American community. We never got actually to that point. In fact, Reverend Sharpton was stabbed by somebody, and he had to go to the hospital. He could have died, really. That's how bad it was. So anyway, but no, we never got to that point. But they were thankful for whatever I do, and I didn't really do very much. I just was there, talked to them. I guess they felt that somebody from the government came to see cared about them and wanted to see what they wanted to do, and that was sufficient. Okay.
Yeah, that's something. That's something more.
Yeah.
So I want to go back also to trust real quick. You talked about and rapport, that in these environments and street mediations, demonstrations, sometimes you were able to develop rapport quickly if you had worked with someone previously, they understood what CRS was, or if you had someone get you help you gain entry into that environment. But what were other techniques that you had to build rapport, gain entry, build trust quickly when you're engaged in street mediation?
Gosh, you just had to go. Sometimes you didn't have a chance to build a rapport or any previous contact. So you had to go and and do your best to explain your role, what you were doing, and so forth, and hope that was enough. So there was no trick to getting over it. You had to be diplomatic. And I think that's very key to use neutral language. Try not to, if somebody says something that is personally offensive, or not to take umbrage. Very hard not to do that. But not to take umbrage, at something that was said. Not to try to correct people. Okay. And people would say to me, they said, one thing, Miguel, I don't like about you. I said, no, what's that? He says, you talk too low. You always talk. Oh, I said, oh my gosh, I'm sorry. I'll try to speak louder. But what I was trying to do was, keep the dialogue straight.
Good. When did you decide it was time to end your engagement in street conciliation? Obviously in Boston, when your
Yeah.
colleague was knocked over and sent to the hospital,
Yeah.
that seems like an end point, but
Yeah.
generally, what's an end point look like? Does the heat get too high, or is it lowered, or what happens?
Well, sometimes, sometimes there really is no end that you could point to that says, okay, this is success and you can get out now. A lot of times there's a lot of tension at the beginning, and then little by little, in very undramatic ways, it starts to peter out. Things start to peter out. There's really no point at that point in going back, because there's nothing is going to happen, and so you close the case. You say, look, this is it, we've done that, we've done what we can do. There really is no point in going back now at this point to keep on going, but sometimes you gotta stay there. But the thing is, there's always something else happening, that was more urgent at the time. So it ended undramatically, and you hope that was it. But even if you got to an agreement or whatever it was, you had a so-called self-enforcing mechanism, there was agreement and so forth. I don't know if you talked to Pat Glenn, but she mediated that a dispute in Minnesota, and I had a big agreement and everything else, and basically it was almost identical to situation now, and there was an agreement, there was the whole thing, and then boom, happens 20 years later, whatever the heck it was.
We hope to talk next week.
History repeats itself.
Right. She raised that in her first conversation.
Yeah.
And I anticipate talking more about it. I'm not sure how much more, but more about it when we talk next week. So good. Yeah, I will follow up with that. Good. Yeah. Anything else you want to tell me about street mediation or conciliation?
No, except that what happened over and over again is that whatever sparked the demonstration, wasn't, the dispute went far deeper than what happened that particular day. Things that happened 30 years ago, and you had to know, or you have to at least give people the opportunity to talk about what happened in previous years. And those were long conversations. But that's one thing I learned, that you gotta try to get to the root cause of the problem, as I mentioned before. Try to get to the root cause. Try to get people to understand what the real cause of the problem is. It wasn't that somebody got shot today or whatever happened today. What's really causing this? Obviously, racism. We haven't been able to erase it, but certainly that happened. Or you want to call it insensitivity, okay, but it's rank racism. But you had to get people to understand where the problems happen, particularly in terms of the white community that you were dealing with as well.
So did any of
I'm not a racist, I never did anything to, but
did any of your street conciliations transition from working with protesters and demonstrators and police to a more formal community mediation process? So, for example, you mentioned Pat Glenn. and she was there,
Yeah.
I assume she was there doing some of this street style conciliation.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
then she helped them develop a long agreement.
Yeah.
Now she's not doing that during the demonstration, I don't think.
Yeah.
That happens after.
No.
Did any of yours transition in a similar way?
No, because for the most part, I was at the crisis response unit, you know?
Mhm.
So my job was to get in on, when things were happening, so to speak. And then this went on, or, then I got out of it, and I went on to the next thing. So I can't think of one, one particular one that I got into, meetings like that. I was called in. Let me try to think of.
That's okay.
I can't think of it at the moment.
No, that's fine. I appreciate that. Did other conciliators take on some of that work because you were doing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it might have been transitioned to one of your colleagues.
Yes. Yeah.
Good. So I only have one more question for you. And that is there anything else you'd like to tell me about your work with CRS?
Well, I think I mentioned that that was interesting to me was, my foreign appointments.
Right.
I think those are pretty unique. I don't know who anybody else has, went to Cuba. I mean, a few of us went to Cuba and so forth. And
Cuba, Panama.
I went to Ireland. I was the only one
Yep.
to Ireland and Romania. Yeah.
The Roma community.
Yeah.
Yep. Mhm.
Yeah.
Those are fascinating experiences,
Yeah,
and I'm so appreciative of your sharing them, Miguel. So I'm going to pause.
Yes.
So Miguel, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure to sit down with you for 3 sessions and about 5 hours to record
Oh my gosh.
your some oral history with your experience as a civil rights mediator. And so I'm so grateful and appreciative, and thank you for your time with me and for all your work you've done on behalf of CRS and for communities across the country. You've truly made a difference.
Good. Well, I want to thank you for this opportunity, and because I think allowing all of my colleagues, people that I work with, also talk, it does 2 things. Once they need to talk about their experience to somebody else. It's very important, and I think hopefully some of it will be a learning experience for people who come into the future, but hopefully it will somehow help to keep CRS alive and working. It's important particularly now in our country where we need CRS more than ever. I don't say that because I work there, because I do really think that we need to have dialogue in the community with all that's going on, and the separation that's, it's more intense than it ever was in the 60s and the 70s. I mean, but certainly I think this will help.